Thank you very much. So my name is Jérémy André. I'm a reporter for Le Point, one of the main weekly news magazines in France. And I'm going to moderate this panel about China and the EU interacting in a multipolar world. So today, with me, we have like four speakers. I'll start by introducing them and then cover the topic and keep maybe 10-15 minutes at the end for questions and try not to be between you and the lunch and claim the most hated panel label, as Duncan said yesterday with the dim sum. So I'll start with Dr. Nadine Godehardt. You're head of the Asia division of the SVP. So Institute for International and Security Affairs since 2013, and you've moved to the Brussels office since September 2024. So how is the perspective? How is it to move in Brussels shortly?
Hello, yeah. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you also for inviting me. It's very nice to be back at this wonderful place and seeing so many people interested in this discussion. Well, actually, it's quite funny because Brussels is the first place I live actually as long as I lived in China and Singapore, so outside of Germany, so that might be quite interesting at this point. Well, we heard a little bit in the last panel on the atmosphere, and I think what I would say is looking at the political level, and particularly the exchanges between the diplomats, and also if you look at the exchanges between the working levels, it's sort of a atmosphere of China fatigue in Brussels, you know, particular people in the institutions, they are kind of tired of having the same discussions all over again. You know, someone said we are in a great bargain with China the last 50 years. I mean, regarding the politicians, we are discussing the same things for decades now. The lists are on the table, the claims are on the table. And so I think what we need to realize is, particularly before this summit, how far we are actually apart, politically speaking. Yeah.
Before digging much deeper into this, I'm going to introduce
because I didn't know that you
get back to you. With us we have also Justyna Szczudlik, Deputy Head of Research and China Analyst at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Your research centers on China's foreign policy, and especially the China-EU and Eastern and Central European relations, but also cross-strait relations, which will give us a very different perspective from maybe the French one. Maybe you want to say a word to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so thank you very much for inviting me. It's an enormous pleasure, and I would like to just take a follow-up to what Nadine has said. I think that when it comes to EU-China relations, we are really in an inflection point. I mean, Europe, because there is so many changes recently, and I think that also the US factor is extremely important. That there is US-China rivalry, and we are not the bystanders. We are taking part in this rivalry, and you know the problem is that China and the US. In the since Trump 2.0, those two countries share some perspectives, and we are in a very difficult situation. And I to say more because it's like echo what Nadine has said, that maybe we have to change our thinking about EU-China relations and think out of the box. So I think it's very important right now.
Thanks. I'll introduce now Professor Tomoo Kikuchi, who works at the graduate school of Asia Pacific Studies at the Waseda University in Tokyo. But you know Europe also, as you've obtained your PhD in Germany. Maybe you want to comment on your European experience.
Okay, yeah. Instead of commenting on European experience, when I saw this is going to be a room full of China experts, I thought about what I can contribute to the discussions, and I think China is now entering a similar phase in terms of macroeconomy as Japan did after the collapse of bubble economy in the 90s. And so I would like to provide my perspective from Japan's experience, what I think about Chinese economy. And my conclusion is that China will not get out of this deflationary state anytime soon. It's not going to be a matter of 2 or 3 years. I think, if at all, it's going to be it's going to take decades. Yeah, that's my conclusion.
And lastly, on my left, we have Jean-François Huchet, who is the president and a professor of economics at INALCO, Institute on Eastern languages in Paris, but who has also been based in Asia 18 years, including as head of CEFC, one of the research centers, French research centers in Asia.
Well, thank you very much first to the organizers to invite me today. Well, I think we are going to discuss the relationship between China and Europe, but I just want to say, following what has been said, that we are probably now paying the price of division, paying the price of having no industrial policy in Europe for a long period of time. I think we have been valuing the market, or at least the theory of market, too much, while we had an example in China with a country which was developing very fast, and we had probably way to react before, and we did not. So it's very difficult now to actually react in that position. We are entangled in a very complex relationship with China, and I think I will come back on the division because it's probably what is going to make us in a difficulty to change the situation.
To react on this, Nadine, can you explain us why we are stuck in that loop of misunderstanding with China for so long? Why is Europe still talking about the same topics and having the same discussion regarding its relation with China?
I mean, well, the easy answer to that question is there's simply no substantial change, I mean, on either side. But I think when we look at this right now, there are a couple of substantial aspects that really changed, and particular since COVID, also since the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And so I think the last 5 years really did change something substantially in the relationship between EU and China. And I think the first one is, even now for the EU, China is important for the people in the EU institutions, but it's never a priority. So there's always something else coming up that is more important, and then they somehow shift to something else and are totally occupied with this question. So this means China is not a priority still. I mean, we need to digest this at this point. And the second point, I think, is that I want to make here that after COVID, I mean, on the working level and the diplomatic level, yes, we have exchanges, but below that, it's still very, very, very less exchange. I mean, when we look at all the Chinese think tanks now coming to Brussels and Europe, this is one thing, but who is actually traveling to China from the European side? Who is defending the European narrative on all the public diplomacy events in China when they talk about the global south. You know, we didn't mention it, I don't want to dig into it, but there's still a rest out there where we also compete with China. And in China, they internationalize the argument on the global south without even Europeans participating. So the third one is, well, it's someone you already mentioned it. I mean, we are living in a world where we have some kind of fragmentation of power, uncertainty. The post-1945 world, the post-Cold War world, all is sort of uncertain. We don't know where we are heading to, but I think what becomes clear in this area or in this era of uncertainty is that the development models, the Chinese one and also the European ones, they are in a competition. I think when 2019 we talked about the systemic rival with China, maybe some of the experts, they understood what it meant, and maybe some in the business industries, they knew what they were talking about, but now we feel it. And this is different. It's because of Ukraine, obviously, but this is also on a different level. So when I listened to the last panel, I thought, yes, this is all true, but then there is the framework. And the framework now is defining where we are heading in our relationship with China.
Justyna, maybe she mentioned it's because of Ukraine, but can you explain how did we get there, especially when there was so much hope in Eastern Europe engaging China?
Okay, but if I may just to say what I think about where we are, because I think it's extremely important, because it's a very dangerous situation for Europe. So now, there is a time of paradoxes, unknown surprises, and unthinkable developments. And look about this, the China and US, and also think about our relations both with US and China. So China and the US share perspectives on, I think, two things that is important for us: the global order, and it is my thinking that both China and Trump would like to have this kind of concept of powers, like a multipolar world that big countries decide about other countries. And I'm from Poland, you know, so our fate was decided in Yalta in 1945, so we are very, cautious when it comes to this multipolarity or something like that. But I think that it is what Trump is thinking. Look, Trump is really afraid of Russia, so he thinks that it would be US, Russia, and China as global powers. And the second important thing for us is the perception of Europe. So China and US, Trump, they have the same perception of Europe. So we are irrelevant. We are not important. So China says that we are a U.S. paddle, or because we are doing everything because U.S. Told us to do so. From the Chinese perspective, from the Trump perspective, Europe is a free rider, right? So it is our perception, both in Trump administration and China, is more or less the same. We are bad, irrelevant. So, it is a very dangerous situation when you're thinking that there is a China-US cooperation and we are somewhere in between. And what is also important about this narrative and language, I think that what Nadine already mentioned. So, as I said about this multipolarity, that, we as a Europe and we and China, when we're talking about something, we're using the same language, the same notions, investments, multilateralism, but China thinks about these notions completely different that we are thinking. So just to give you an example from this Central European perspective, from many years ago, China decided to be more active in Central Europe, and they would like to, and we also invited China to invest in Central Europe. And for us, investments like a greenfield, brownfield, sometimes mergers and acquisitions. Okay, China say, okay, no problem. What we would like to offer you is the, credit loans and something like that. So we are talking about investment, but the meaning of this notion is completely different. Same with multipolarity, as I said, but also multilateralism. China has the multilateralism with Chinese characteristics. It's a multilateral bilateralism. You look at BRICS. BRICS is like a hub and spoke format. Same 16 plus 1 or 17 plus 1, something that was created when it comes to Central Europe. Also, this cooperation between China and Africa. So we are talking about multilateralism. Wow, fantastic. But China would like to have this multilateral bilateralism. So, it is the problem that we are signing some kind of agreements or declarations. We are very happy, but, I think that we are not aware what we decided to signing this agreement, because we are using the same notions, but the meaning is completely different. And maybe last point, because we have to really think about in a different way when it comes to China. So I think it is obvious right now that the differences between, let's say, China and Europe have been widening, and we should not expect that there is a possibility to cooperate with China on a strategic level. Sorry, it's impossible. And especially when China cooperates with Russia, that is a real aggressor. So I think we should think about some kind of tactical, not strategic, small kind of cooperation in order to stabilize relations and build a kind of minimum trust. I could not imagine that we could really cooperate on a strategic level.
Nonetheless, as was mentioned by the previous panel, China is trying to take the best opportunity of the strategic shift at a global level, and the way Europe reacts to the pressure from the United States. So, Jean-François Huchet, could you explain what's the strategy of China to benefit from this strategic shift, and can it succeed actually?
Well, I think, as I was saying before, and I think it has been said, I think the old ghost of division, of the lack of unity, and the fact that China is seeing us, Europeans, very weak, I think it's still continuing, and I think China is still playing that card. I think divide and rule is really by China. I think a policy that is going to continue. I just wanted to, I remember one of the most preeminent French diplomats, Mr. Claude Martin, who has been an ambassador to China, said in a recent book that he had the feeling that the biggest failure was the incapacity of French company and German company to work together in the 90s on the Chinese market to build some kind of presence of European firms on the China market. But I think again this lack of unity is really killing us in front of China. But nevertheless, I think I would question your question actually, and I think we have to think also where we are at the moment and where we want to go. I think first that what has been happening in Ukraine has been also very damaging for China, because some countries may be expecting Hungary have been rethinking the kind of relationship they want to have with China, especially the country which are exposed to Russia. I think it's one thing. So all the Europe 13 plus strategy has been completely crawling down and cannot continue like that. I think there is also a degree of awareness in terms of technological transfer. The naive position that we had for so many years, I think, is already finished at the moment. Of course, we might not have the possibility to react behind that, but still, the fact that we are conscious about that is already something extremely important. Also, there is an additional point that the rearming, the fact that we once again wants to have at the European level or at the national level, that for NATO we want to increase, our military spending will probably, of course, induce that certain industry are going to close to and be considered as strategic, and it's going to be very difficult for some Chinese industry to penetrate or to cooperate also sometimes with some European companies. Then Europe is also speaking to third countries. I will be back on that issue when we talk about bilateral relations between France and China. But I think it is also an important part of the European policy to talk with other countries which are considered as very important, like China is doing also on the global south. I think Europe is also having a strategy on that. And finally, but I think maybe it's your next question, we don't really know what China wants with Europe. It's not very clear about that. It's why China is also sending some very mixed signal. Some of them are very positive, but some of them are also quite negative. So I think it's very also difficult for Europe to react in that context.
But how do you explain that? So, like, we had this very tough speech from Wang Yi last week that leaked in the press, and at the same time we have this charm offensive, as has been labeled, of like Chinese officials coming to Europe with like new ways to engage Europeans. So, how do you explain this discrepancy, this contradiction?
Well, I think there is no contradiction in that sense, because first of all, as I said, Europe is really not important, really, because look, when there was when Trump started the trade war with the whole world and with Europe as well, so there was some thinking that probably China would like to use this opportunity and to offer us something, to have because of the problems with the US. And frankly speaking, talking with my colleagues dealing with China, we were waiting for some kind of an offer, something that China could put on a table, but it's only charm offensive. In a sense, only narrative, lip service, nothing. The only one thing that China did is that decided to lift the sanctions on MPs, nothing else, and started to talk that we have to talk once again about Kai. So there is no offer. So we are not important. And look, what we are doing. I could not understand. We invited Xi Jinping for a summit that should be held in Brussels. Xi Jinping rejected, and what we decided to have a summit in Beijing. So Xi Jinping is sitting and waiting for Europeans coming to Beijing to talk about EU-China relations. So I think that it is a signal that China is strong and Europe is not very, very important. When it comes to the Wang Yi words about that China doesn't want Russia to lose the war, first of all, it is true, because from my understanding, what China wants as an end game is a hybrid peace. Hybrid peace in Ukraine means in a frozen conflict. It is the best solution, because China doesn't want Russia to lose, but China doesn't want Russia to win as well, because it's strong Russia as a victorious Russia will be politically a challenge for China. Russia as a loser would be problem, because it'd be some kind of problems inside Russia. So it's not good for China. So to be honest, when I'm thinking about what Wang Yi said, I think there is a kind of a signal from the top that we can now say openly that China supports Russia. I was in Beijing in May, and during some meetings with the think tankers and Chinese experts, I was really surprised that right now China's experts say, yes, we support Russia. Of course, they say that China does not provide Russia with weapons, but generally speaking, when it comes to the political level, yes, we support Russia because Russia is a strategic interest, Ukraine is not. And I was surprised that they are pretty openly say about it, because after the invasion, when we hosted Chinese delegation, it was like they tried to there was so empty talks and tried to say that no it's that we as a China we do not support Russia. They are in an open way say that we support Russia because it is our strategic interest because of the US. So I think that maybe the fact that experts can say openly, maybe it is a kind of a signal from the top, and it is nothing strange that Wang Yi said that China doesn't want Russia to lose.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about the EU perspective, but I think it's important to decenter and maybe talk about the Chinese perspective. So, Professor Kikuchi, can you explain maybe what's the
Japanese perspective?
No, but I was talking about like the perspective from the Chinese economy. So, could you explain
Okay, thank you. For those of us, the younger ones among us, let me remind you there was a time when Japan was a threat to the United States and the world, and Trump was talking about Japan as it's talking about China today. Japan, after that, experienced a so-called lost 30 years. There was a collapse of property bubble in Japan as well in 1990s, and the property bubble was crazy in Japan. There are estimates that the property price of entire Tokyo was equal to the entire United States, right? That's how crazy it was. If you look at the ratio of apartment price to annual income, it was 18 times in big cities in Tokyo. You know what, in China, among the biggest city, it is 50 times. So, you know, there's no way that ordinary people can buy a property based on their income today in China. China's ratio of private debt to GDP is actually today worse than what it was in Japan in 1995. It's above 220%. Japan did not reach 220%. Youth unemployment in China is worse than Japan at its worst. I belong to the so-called Ice Age generation in Japan that had the worst experience after graduating universities, and that's why I came to Europe and spent the most part of the last 30 decades outside Japan. But today's youth unemployment rate is probably in China over 20%. Okay? The worst in Japan was 10%. 20% real estate sector has non-performing loans, you know, and that might translate into banking crisis that Japan experienced. However, on the positive side, I do think that China has still demand potentials, and that's because the urbanization ratio in Japan is still 66%, whereas in Japan in the 1990s was 78%, and today is over 90%. But as some of the panelists mentioned earlier, the registered urban population is only 48%, right? So the gap is 250 million. There are some estimates that to make these rural immigrants to cities actually registered urban resident, it takes about 25% of GDP to make them have access to public service and so on. There are many reasons to be pessimistic about consumption growth in China. I don't know whether you know, Japan is the fastest aging and declining population country, but the total fertility rate today in China is lower than Japan. Okay, 1% in China, 1.15% in Japan. China's Gini coefficient, okay, the measure of income inequality, is worse today in Japan as it was in Japan 30 years ago. The Gini coefficient for Japan has not changed much in the last 30 years. Public social expenditure in Japan as a percentage of GDP in China is only 10%. In Japan, it's 16%. Again, this hasn't changed much in the last 30 years. When the bubble collapsed, Japan was already a relatively wealthy country and had 26,000 US dollar GDP per capita. Today in China, it's 13. So I think there's all reason not to be very optimistic about consumption growth in China in the coming decades, given what happened also in Japan. We also heard about from Professor Huang's lecture that there is a diminishing return to investment. Fixed capital formation in China occupies 42% of GDP. In Japan, it was 35 in its highest days. Today, it dropped to 25%. ROEs of Chinese companies are dropping. Percentage of fixed capital formation by private companies are dropping. Percentage of market capitalization of private companies are dropping in China. VC funding, startups funded, dropping, almost vanished. China dominant in R&D spending and also in the number of patent applications. Also, if you look at measures like number of papers cited in top 1% of scientific journals, again, China is performing very well. But if you look at cross-border patent royalty payments, that's how much the rest of the world appreciates patent and innovation in China. China still lags behind Japan. It is the US, Germany, Japan, and then China. So my conclusion is that the concerns of the middle income trap and grow old before rich are real. China's high-saving, investment-driven, export-oriented economic growth will run its course as it did in Japan in the past 30 years. Domestic demand-driven growth is unlikely. State-led technological progress will not solve China's problem.
Yeah. So after all these very pessimistic views, I might have a few words at the end about what's possible and what actually China and EU can offer to each other. And I'll start with Jean-François Huchet. With France, we've not talked much about France. We've seen that a deal about cognac has been signed, but what's next? And basically, from the French perspective, how can EU engage China again?
Well, if you allow me, I think we are missing just one very important point in the previous question that we were discussing is, well, we all agree that China doesn't want to change a lot on Europe, but we have also to ask the question, and it's related to what you just said, can China change? Also, it is a very important question, because if we take only two examples, you take, for example, the surpluses, the industrial surpluses. Can really China change? We know, I mean, for people who have been studying China for a long period of time, we know that the economic machine of China is producing surpluses for a long period of time. The difference is that now is global and is not reduced to internal market. The second example in the way China interacts with other countries and the kind of narratives that China is using on the West, on Europe, of some democratic countries being weak, and that China is going to replace and promoting another discourse on the international relation. So what I just want to say is that to change the relationship with Europe, China will need also to do some efforts and to change so many things internally that it's extremely difficult for China also to change those things and to appear on the international scene as a different country. And I think we have to take into account. Now for the bilateral relation, as I said before, I think France, like China, I think the bilateral relation is not as important as it used to be maybe 20 or 30 years ago. I think both countries, I think it's obvious for China, France is not anymore such an important country, despite, you know, the General de Gaulle and all the discourse that we can have on the fact that France was the first country to recognize, well, among the first to recognize China in the 60s. And for France, it's the same. If you take the example of the speech that President Macron has been doing in Singapore during the Shangri-La, I think he really insisted on the fact that France has to talk with every country and has to escape, and he actually said it yesterday in London also, to escape from China and the US trap of being trapped with one of the two relationship. We switch from an Asia-Pacific strategy towards an Indo-Pacific strategy, I think for France is also very important. Then we have also some problems. Of course, we said it with Ukraine, but we didn't speak about Africa. We didn't speak about the Pacific, where actually France has a lot of problems with the Chinese action and rhetoric. So I would say that despite, you know, the sign of friendship that we have each time that the Chinese President Xi Jinping is coming to France or President Macron going to China. I think behind those friendship signs, we have a lot of difficulty to really re-engineer and to find a very strategic relationship with China. And just a few days ago, and I think the Chinese embassy here in France is going to take advantage on that, we have a very different view among political parties on what we should do with China. And we had a National Assembly report which was published recently from the extreme left, who said that we have to cut basically our relationship with US and embrace a very deep and important relationship with China. So I think China is already seeing that not only Europe is divided, but among France and among our different political parties, we have such a diverse view on what we should do with China. So it's very difficult. So at the end of the day, I think we don't have to expect much change in a relationship. I think we are going to be quite realistic. Of course, China is becoming much more important on the technological level. We don't want to be engaged on Taiwan. I think market and technology are going to remain, and maybe it's what we are trying to do, probably to engage on certain issues like environment, but it's not what we expected, I think, 10 or 20 years ago to have as a relationship with China.
Yeah, I mean, China is changing quite a lot, I think, and I think that what needs to be done is that we need to prepare much more for what is going on in China and how the policy actually changed under Xi Jinping. This needs a lot of preparation, a lot of, I talked about the China fatigue. It's exactly the wrong thing that should happen. We should annoy them, we should be persistent in our position, not unfriendly, but just, staying our ground. And I think, in business, I think this is way better understood than maybe in politics. So this is one thing. And the second thing, maybe more as an academics, we are going back to dialectics, It's all about contradiction. Chinese understanding of contradiction is, obviously, you go to Europe and you talk with everyone, and at the same time, you have a very realistic foreign policy. This is happening all the time now. So, as being the German here, if you read Hegel, in a dialectic argumentation, you cannot persuade someone, but you can irritate someone. So this is, I think, the most important thing that we can do still. And maybe just because it's so important, we talk about Ukraine, and maybe in China there's already a Ukraine fatigue, which is good when it comes to the EU-China relations, but it is important that this is way more subtle. It's related to how we want to organize how we want to organize international relations in the future. Because if you look at Chinese politics, the Sige Ingai, the four should, there are two principles. The first is to respect the UN Charter. The second is to respect national integrity and sovereignty. And the third one is to respect the legitimate security concerns of every country. And the fourth is peace. So if you talk to Chinese counterparts, then they would tell you the first two are the principles. The third, the legitimate security concerns, is the reality of international relations. And the fourth, this is the vision. So we are living in a reality of legitimate security concerns right now. And this is about power. So the question we should ask from a European perspective is, how do we want to organize international relations? Who is going to define the rules between big and small powers, And if you ask these questions, Chinese counterparts, you usually hit a point of silence. And because it's not that everything is in the box on the Chinese side, that they have this big idea of how to organize the international system, but it is what we here in Europe should care about, because we have a multilateral system that works, at least within Europe, with all its problems, that's very clear. But this is something important when we talk to the Chinese, also to others, but today we talk about China. So this is something that we need to some extent defend. And this is, so it's really about understanding that you need to understand more what is going on in China, not less. So all the trends that we are seeing right now, less students interested, less people traveling, this is not good, you know, it's not helping us to solve anything. And so I think it's way more subtle, way more complex, and there are no easy answers. And so we need to be persistent. It's like an endless game of chess, you know. You need to still keep your mind always, you know, at point. You need to be very, very smart.
I'll let Justyna have a few last words,
Yeah,
maybe concluding words.
Okay. So maybe just if I may. So first of all, because I'm from Poland, so you know we have a border with Ukraine. So for us, since the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the fact that China supports Russia, so China has become a security actor in Europe in its negative sense, of course, because it's, you know, China is there because of the support. So it is the very important thing. And I know that there was some, in the previous panels, there was some kind of discussion that maybe we should not securitize everything, but I think from our perspective, from Central European perspective, security is really the most important thing. So, and when it comes to China and thinking about this EU approach, I think that we have many tools that we can use when it comes to China. The problem is that there is a lack of the political will to use the tools, different kind of defensive measures, because we are, to be honest, we are defensive. We are all the time behind the curve. And I would like to tell you that if you look what Europe did after Russia's invasion, it was like, because Europe was under the huge pressure and it was a real threat, we could impose sanctions, we could be united, we are united when it comes to Russia. So I think it is like Nadine said, that we have to make China angry in order to be, you know, we should be more offensive, less defensive. And I think that we can really many tools, but we are afraid of using it. This anti-coercion instrument, you know, it's a very, very good instrument, but we are scared to use it. So I think that, and we have a leverage. The problem is right now that European Union consisted of middle powers. For middle powers, the real tool, the weapon is the norms, rules, and international law. The problem is that I think that this does not work, and we are also responsible for that because we could not, as Europe, criticize Israel and the United States for its attack on Iran, to be honest. So now the problem is that we as a middle powers, we could not use our weapon as a international law. So the only solution, I think, is to make EU as a bloc. Sorry, there will be a fragmentation. To have a bloc, and of course, you know, I'm from Poland, so maybe you will be so surprised at what I would like to say. The federalization, I think, is a very good option. And also, I would like to say that I really, right now, also different strange words from the Polish person, that the strategic autonomy is really important. Could you imagine that we now in Europe, we are started to think and making some exercise and think if we could deter Russia without the United States. You know, it is a completely different situation. We have to really think out of the box and really focus on security when it comes to Europe, especially when it comes to Central Europe. So I stop here. Sorry for that.
Thank you very much. We are going to take a few questions. There are 10 minutes remaining. I think you were the fastest.
Thank you. This is Finbar Birmingham from SCMP in Brussels. Picking up on something that Nadine and several of the panelists said about Europe needs to be more divided, less divided on China. There's no capacity, couldn't be more divided. I have sat through far too many foreign affairs councils and European councils watching China get bumped off the agenda because there are more issues. looking down the road, there's not going to be any fewer issues. So I'm wondering, with Europe probably going to be more divided in the future and having even less capacity, how do we actually get to a stage where there's a serious conversation about the things that you're recommending? And a second question, if I may be so cheeky, Justyna made the point that China doesn't give Europe anything, and it's charm offensive because it thinks Europe's weak. I want to ask the rest of the panels if that's a consensus. Do you sort of share that view, or if there's any dissension on that? Thanks.
Maybe you can answer, because the questions was about divisions that you mentioned.
Well, I'm not completely sure that Europe is going to be more divided in the future than it is now. I think it's very difficult to be more divided than what we have been in the past. I think Europe and what's happening at the geopolitical level, it's quite a shock actually for most of the politicians. But of course we have different views on what is a shock, and we have also different level. We've seen that recently with the fact that France wanted to maintain, for example, a unity when we receive a European unity when we receive some Chinese leaders, and recently the Chancellor of Germany went alone to China, for example. So it was quite a difficult situation. But I'm maybe the only light of optimism, but maybe it's not shared by everyone in this panel. But I think when Europe is in front of a wall, or when Europe is in front of a big difficulty, you have a kind of reaction somewhere. Would it be sufficient? I'm not sure about that. That is probably the problem, because we are really not giving ourselves all the possibility to react. And I really appreciate what was said in the last panel before. We are not putting on our side, for example, our market. I think you said it before, and I think it's really right. We are not having the tools like in the United States. For example, if we take the history of some tariff on steel, for example, it was so obvious that Europe was not doing sufficient for a long period of time to protect its industry. And I could repeat those examples on many industries. So now the question is, are we going to get serious in protecting our market and building our market also, and trying to really have a more common market, like the Draghi report said in many ways. But it's the same on research, on innovation. So I think the ball is in our camp now, and we have to decide if we really want to be serious in building Europe or next stage of Europe. Otherwise, yes, we might be not naive anymore, but I don't think we will have the weapons to react on what China and US are willing to do in the international relation.
We're going to take another question. The lady here.
Thanks. I think there's a question from the lady on the side as well. I'm Helen. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm from the Office of Eric Schmidt, working on tech investments and thought leadership, and also from Intrigue Media. I loved your presentations. My question is about this topic, so interacting with the multipolar world. We know China, as a lot of panelists have mentioned, have a lot of influence through the BRI. They're doing effectively a lot of business through those opportunities. But where does Europe see its opportunities in leveraging its influence in other parts of the world, particularly in the global south and perhaps in Western Europe as well?
Great question, because we skipped that topic.
Yeah, it was the topic.
Who wants to answer?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think I answered two questions, because one was not answered of Finbar. I mean, we cannot always ask in institutions for more resources to have more capacity to deal with some kind of challenge. So I think we need to somehow look at the capacities that we have and maybe think about how we can use them more strategically. And for EU institutions, these are basic things. When people rotate, you need to somehow preserve the knowledge that they have. Maybe we should consider to have our own translators when we deal with the Chinese, not also on the national level. So this is something. So there are some things that I think that are possible, that are not really cost intensive, but they are not, because within the organizations, it's very difficult to think strategically about knowledge. But knowledge is key if you deal with China. The second one, it's a great question. It's again very different. We could have had a panel. We should have had a panel on this question, actually. I guess what is always said is that the EU sort of has the soft infrastructure power when it comes to third countries or the so-called global south, and China has the hard infrastructure power. I guess, again, for me, the real competition that I see is between autonomy and dependency. Multipolarity, when we talk about multipolarity, it's sort of very shiny and everyone is using it and interpreting it differently. But if you think about what's the mechanism, it's usually about who can create dependencies and who can get more autonomy out of it. So this is how I look at China's connectivity politics, not only the BRI. And I think this is not the way the EU is looking at the policies, the global gateway, or other infrastructural foreign policy. But maybe we should, and we do have good arguments. Why are so many people still coming to the EU? This is also something that is important to notice, and going back to the maybe more, in a Chinese term, civilizational argument, that there is something attractive about the European Union. And I think this is maybe something that we also need to revalue without falling back into the old trap of selling our model or something. It's not about that, but there's still something attractive, and this is the freedom that we have within Europe, and this is something that you can sell, even if you product infrastructure, if you build infrastructure, if you talk about infrastructure. So I think there is room. There's still space where a lot of things can happen. But I think the problem is, if you look at Global Gateway, it's just very unclear what it actually is. I think it was always shifting around. It was infrastructure, geopolitics, and back and forth. So there's a narrative around it, and then there are projects on the ground. And so I think this is different agencies within the European system, and then it becomes very complicated. Very similar to a national state in a way. But when we look at how development cooperation is cut back now, there is definitely room for the European Union to make its stance. And again, not for everything, but this needs to happen politically first, and then we can talk about how to finance this and so on and so forth.
Justyna, you want to add something?
Just very briefly, referring to Finbar's question, I think that Ursula von der Leyen during the first term said that she wanted to make the EU a geopolitical EU, and I think it is a very good answer to your question. So we have tools to focus on this strategic autonomy, real one, the federalization, be more offensive, the power projection instead of defensive mode. The problem is that it is easy to set and difficult to do that, and the political is crucial. So we really have tools in order to be, let's say, more offensive or more important when it comes to China as a bloc. But of course, it is easier said than done. And the last point, I think it is very important when it comes to China's challenge, because really, believe me, China is preparing to be involved in Ukraine when it comes to post-war reconstruction. So, China is sending right now a very subtle signals about peacekeeping operation. Okay, I'm not talking that China would like to send peacekeeping troops, but it's a kind of a diplomatic, very subtle, delicate game with us, with Europe and the US. But what China would like to do is to be involved in the reconstruction. And when you look at this so-called 12 points, this peace plan, something that China announced in 2023, a year after the invasion, the last point is the only one that is new. And is China, in an open way, says that is interested in the post-war reconstruction in Ukraine. So this would be another challenge for us. China at the EU gates with some kind of a reconstruction project. So I think it is another thing that we should think about in the EU.
Now, I'm really sorry, but we are going to stop because it's been a very slow boat to the lunch. I thank you all for your attention.